Thank you for joining us for another opportunity of fellowship with This Is My Story, testimonies that move the soul. This afternoon, I have the opportunity to share with you a brief introduction of a gentleman who actually used to be my personal shepherd, in as much as he was my pastor at Kansas Avenue for a period of time. Compassionate gentleman, one who's compassionate about the word and compassionate about the sheep. It takes that type of compassion if you're going to be working with God's flock. And he does that not only as a pastor, but also as a chaplain. And that's why I think I recognize that within his character and how he likes to be there for his flock. He's a father, he's a son, he's a pastor, he's a chaplain, he has his doctorate that allows him to work with the city and help them in their particular projects, as well as the expansion of their programs. He's had tremendous success there in the area where he serves in Indianapolis. It was about 3 weeks ago, we had the opportunity to host him at our home and get to know him a little bit better. My husband having met him for the first time, and it must have gone well because it was 1:30 in the morning and they were still talking. So let us break bread together, went from breaking bread to sharing. He is close friends with someone who's on this call right now, Chief Warrant Officer Frank Benjamin. They have a close bond as brothers, but today it is his story that unites us together this afternoon. The boy that would not talk, and the influence of a mother who was determined to defy the diagnosis of a physician. But that is one of many, but that one in particular is what we'll hear today. And then he may decide, if he is inclined, to share with us one of his stories as a chaplain of a visit that ended on a very, very positive note. There's so much that could be said of him, but he has committed his life to making a difference in the lives of others. And for that, we can say amen. I don't want to take any more of your time, Dr. Coleman. I am so delighted. I know last week we were hoping we could connect, but you were called away. And we appreciate your willingness to continue to serve, even when it's last minute. And you so graciously agreed to come today. And so thank you for that. Thank you for that. And thank you to your beautiful wife, Lorraine, who's allowed you to be on loan with us for this period of time. Give her hugs for me. But without any further ado, Elder Coleman, Dr. Coleman, thank you. And the time is now yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sister Debbie. I'm just thrilled to be invited to be a part of this community of faith, sharing amazing stories of how God has worked. And a while back, Elder Frank let me know, and I've had a chance to quietly listen to a few others and just been inspired myself. I come across so many stories, but it's so good to hear among our community of faith how God has worked amazingly in the lives of his people. And just had a wonderful time some weeks ago out there. You and your husband hosted me at your wonderful home, and just a very fast weekend, but just had a wonderful time reconnecting and meeting him for the first time. And, when spirits connect, that's how God works it. And so, Debbie, we just appreciate your commitment to God's people and serving in so many ways. While we're at Kansas, you were just relentlessly trying to find ways that we as a church could be effective and break through some of the traditional barriers that kind of tie our hands as Adventists. So I just kind of came back. I had a triple assignment today. So I had a Zoom Sabbath school with the church in New York, my aunt's home church, and the pastor there kind of twisted my arm. So that was fun. And then I preached at a church here for this week here, from last week to this coming Tuesday. I'm here in Denver, helping out some pastors' team with the conference here and also on the medical side. And so a church here asked me to speak today. So it turned out to be a young adult church. And so as I looked at the congregation, I had the same message, but switch the approach on my feet. And I'll come back to that in my story. But what a privilege I counted to be to just share with us this afternoon. as I think of how God has kind of led through my life. And as I kind of reflected on this in the last 2 weeks, Sister Debbie, it just again brought laughter, joy, and some tears, just kind of looking back and going back into some things and exploring some feelings and just seeing how God has worked it out. And so a great opportunity to share with you this afternoon. I must start by saying that as I shared with the congregation today is my spiritual birthday. I was baptized. I was baptized 50 years ago this Sabbath with 17 others. I think there were only 2 of us as children at that time, and the others were teenagers or adults. And so many of us have kept connected. I was baptized in Toronto, Canada, at one of our mother churches there, and just a week before. So today is my spiritual birthday, and next week is my physical birthday. So so December is a full month of celebrating Jesus and also celebrating what he's done for me in my life with friends and family. Yeah, so starting that with you. My story, every time I think of it or every time my mother hears me, I was talking with her this morning. I tell her I was doing this, and she said, "Oh yeah," she said, "I think I wore out my knees." And she laughed, and she's 90. And Elder Frank, Mom, she was saying, "I think I had the reverse. I think early when I was younger, I wore out my knees, and I think God healed me. Now I don't have any knee problems, where most of my peers, they are having surgery and replacing their knees." And she said, "Maybe the prayers on my knees healed me." So she has a great sense of humor, and she and her mother in this journey of my life, especially early on, is what kind of brought, their prayers. I think
you need to be up
my
at any
dad's
special
kind of brought me through a lot of that. And so we praise God for that. Well, to jump right in, for those who don't know, I'm 3rd generation Adventist, 4th Christian. And when you add Caribbean to Adventist, it's a whole other mix. So I kind of laugh at my Caribbean culture, and we joke around it. Even today after service, a few ladies came up and they said, "Hey, they're from the island of Jamaica too," and so forth. But I was, my parents had just come back from England, and months after that, I was born to them in Jamaica. I'm the third child and the third son. And so by the time I came along, my parents were expecting a girl. And so that was, in a sense, disappointing. And then the day I was born, it turned out that it was a Wednesday. And so we were in the country at a church way up in the hills of Jamaica, where the coffee beans are grown, in 2 little towns, Frankfield and Lesterfield. We lived up there for a short time, but during that time I was born. But my mom went into labor while we were in prayer meeting, and they got her, I should say, and me to the house, and midwives delivered. But she had a difficult delivery. So each birthday, I remember, just every birthday, I just tell my mom thanks, because she went through a pretty tough time without having the benefit of hospitals and the physician by and all of that. But she climbed the rough side of the mountain with me, and thank God she went through that for me. Born into a family of the third boy, and so we were rambunctious, and just started normally. Just about the age of 3, we were getting ready to go to the Cayman Islands. My dad was starting up actually the 3 churches there in the 3 different islands of the Cayman Islands. So we went there for a few years. My sister was born there. But just about that time that we went there, I was speaking normally and just wasn't able to speak anymore. It backed down to a stutter, and then I wasn't able to get anything out. And that was the start of the journey. And they couldn't figure out what was happening. They thought, it wasn't like I was nervous, because I couldn't talk around my family. I wasn't in school at that time. So it wasn't an issue of public fright or any other thing like that. Nobody understood it. I didn't. So early on in those little islands, the medical advice they got was that, Pastor Sister Coleman, I think you may have to accept that maybe your son has mental disabilities. In other words, he's retarded, he's slow, and that just might be his plight. And so bless her heart, my mom said, get thee behind me, Satan. And she refused to accept that diagnosis and just began to pray and pray and pray. And then, of course, my grandparents and other families started to pray. What was interesting at this time that they found out, I remember a little bit of it, but I every now and then in the midst of that, I would be able to get out just a word or two, and then it's gone for another month or so. Um, Again, not knowing what it was medically, it was just on a prayer. But the good thing is my parents treated me normally, so did my brothers and sisters. So I was able to communicate with them. That's why I use my hands that much, Elder Frank. Um, I pointed, I signed. I didn't learn sign language, but I learned to write early, and I was able to speak before, so I could mouth the words, but nothing came out. So that's how we communicated, and in that sense, there was a normality to it. And yet, when we went in public or to church or so, others, the saints couldn't understand it. They had all kind of remedies, and of course, we tried many of the Caribbean remedies. If you're Jamaican or you're Caribbean, if your knee hurts, you drink tea. If your back hurts, you drink tea. If you're having surgery, you drink tea. So tea is supposed to be the medicine for all. And so they tried all kinds of tea. In fact, another tradition in the islands was that if you drank out of a seashell, then that would help. So I remember from that time on, everything I drank was pretty much out of a shell. Not sure that it helped or worked at all, but in that sense, I felt special. I'm at the table, everybody has a cup, but it's a beautiful shell that's been boiled and cleansed for my drinking purposes. And so that started us on that journey of looking at ways how to cope with that. In the midst of all of that, just after my sister was born, a big hurricane was coming toward the tiny island of Cayman Islands, which is so small. In fact, Grand Cayman is so small, the airport takes up half the island, literally. And my sister Audrey lives there now. But they're just tiny little islands. But a hurricane was coming toward it, and we literally lived on the beach. Our house was on stilts on the beach right there. And so we moved everything out, and behind it were caves. And so we moved in the caves so that the animals in the island, these caves are intricate all over. And so we were able to stay safe during that oncoming hurricane. And my parents remember that them telling me they named these hurricanes. So this may be in Hurricane Ryan or whatever it was. And they remembering we were just headed into the cave, and I ran out of the mouth of the cave and pointed my finger with a childlike audacity. In the name of Jesus, Hurricane Ryan, you get out of here. Well, it turns out, I don't know if God answered my prayers or the prayers of others that were just merciful. It turned out that hurricane came to the island, went around it, and after it went around the three small islands, Cayman Islands, it then continued on the path. And we didn't realize that because, once a hurricane is in the area, the winds and the rain are just as strong as if it hits. But we realized a few days later, the hurricane had indeed passed and saved us most of the brunt of it. Our little hut home on the beach was pretty much destroyed, but it was of such that local islanders were able to rebuild it for us in but a few days. So in the midst of all of that, we see different breakthroughs at times where God used me to open my mouth and say a few words, to say hello to someone, or in that situation to just threaten the hurricane, to royally, spiritually curse it out, tell them to go the other way. So, that was certainly a part of the journey we look back at. And, I look back at that time, and I've shared it with many friends and family to say, wow, at different times in my life, I look back and I said, I wish I had the guts and the faith that little 3-year-old boy had to just curse certain evils of the devil and just face it in that way. So we faced a lot, and yet indeed, even though I had this, just couldn't speak, the speech impediment was more than frustrating, I still had a pretty normal life as a boy, if I would say that, up until this point. Lots of joy in the family. I, at that time, still followed my dad everywhere he went. So I started to be his bodyguard, Elder Frank, and that from that early on. Years later, we moved back to Jamaica. And when we moved back to Jamaica, then at about 6 years of age, then I started kindergarten. So I started kindergarten school without the ability to talk. And so that was now a whole other thing, because I was so used to feeling at home and understood and heard by what I wrote out and all of that. Now school was a different kind of challenge. And I attended the grade school that was just near the entrance of now Northern Caribbean University, which at that time was West Indies College. And those of you who know, Northern Caribbean University is a big deal now around the islands. For years, it's been a waiting list to go in it. So it's been a legacy university in Jamaica that serves many of the Caribbean islands. So we lived right at the foot there at the college and started school there, walked to school, tried to start school in a normal way. And then, a whole different phase of life came at me. Kids can be cruel, and they were cruel. I had a few friends, and fortunately my older brother, Carlton, who was 2 grades up on me, was there with me. So kind of he served a little go-between and protector and support. But it was difficult starting school and all that's expected of the teachers, of the students, and not being able to speak. Initially, we had 2 teachers in my kindergarten class, and they just assumed I was retarded. I didn't know anything till I went to the board and started writing. Then it blew their mind that I could write so legibly as a first grader. And it just put a lot in perspective. So I had difficult teachers who didn't understand, but then I had teachers who were very gracious and supportive and went out of their way to put together different lesson plans and ways in which to engage me in the classroom and to help me to grow through that. So I stayed at that school until we left Jamaica and migrated to Canada. And in that time, as we moved on, then
Elder Dr. Coleman, stop for one moment, please. Would you unmute? Sorry. Go ahead and unmute.
All right.
Thank you.
Somehow it just got muted? Okay.
Yeah.
What was the last
you.
thing you heard me say? I don't know how that happened, but.
When we got into the island.
Yeah, you had moved back to Jamaica, and the teachers were mean.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I was saying that we moved back to Jamaica, and then I started school.
You had gotten to the point where you were talking about the 2 teachers.
Okay. Yeah. So I was mentioning
Thanks,
that. Thank you so much for bringing me up to speed here from where you missed off from me. I had 2 teachers who were some that didn't understand, but those 2 were very helpful in terms of putting lesson plans together that would help me learn, that would help them understand me. And so that kind of carried me through first, second, and third grade. And then about that time, then we moved from Jamaica. We migrated to Canada. And that time I learned a lot of skills in terms of how to navigate my lack of my inability to speak, and very much limited in terms of how I could communicate. So starting school in Canada at a public school system as opposed to an Adventist school system, because at that time there were not any. We were one of the first Caribbean families that had moved to Canada. So we were not only facing my speaking disabilities, but also the unique Canada racism. So many welcomed us, but that came in. And of course, that made church and life and everything another level of difficulty. And but adjustment came. God led us to good people, miracle after miracle. That was a difficult time for my dad too, because at that time, they didn't do a transfer from pastoring to Jamaica. He had to step out on his own before the Canadian conference hired him and prove himself. But God used that. So while he didn't feel threatened or he didn't feel it beneath his privilege to drive a taxi cab, God put him in a role to be able to help a lot of other Caribbean families come to Canada. So if he knew the families when they came, he got them a job. He was able to find them a church. He was able to find them housing for the connections that he had. And anytime he took a family down to the immigration office, it was a slam dunk. It was a done deal. Manley Coleman brought them in, so they're on their feet, they're ready to go. So our churches really, he grew churches really by social work, taking care of families who had just migrated from England, Jamaica, Trinidad, all over the Caribbean. And with a team of others, just that's how a lot of our churches in Canada grew. And now any of you who know a little bit about the Adventist work in Canada, if you go to a church in Canada and it has 150 members, you probably have 200 coming. Whereas in here or in Southern California, if you got 150, you're probably happy if 50 are coming. So the Caribbean connection to church and to Adventism just seems, for what it is, just is a lot more stronger in that way in terms of attendance and involvement and so forth. So we migrated to Canada and the work grew. And of course, the challenges also grew for me in school and where I went from there, but went through each grade successfully. In that process, learning what the normal student doesn't, learning how to communicate better with teachers, learning how to write better, learning how to navigate all kinds of other challenges a lot more, which today I look back and it's really helped me do things that most communicators are not able to do. And the means and ways of connecting with people in another level that just comes with disability. I've learned in the process that when God gives you a disability, then he gives you an extra ability. If you know people that are have disability with movement or being ambulating or sight, then their hearing is a lot better. If they can't do this, then they can do that a lot better. So you learn other coping skills that make you a more resilient and stronger person. That's why this guy has been able to be in ministry for 38 years. I always say you're either crazy or you love it insanely. So, those are some ways that God has brought us thus far here. Sister Debbie, I don't know if you want me to take a pause for some questions at this time. I can touch on different aspects here. Just let me know what would facilitate this best.
You can keep going.
Okay. All right. So far, so good. Everybody follow me okay?
Yes.
Trying to make sure the story is clear and it kind of follows through. I'm growing up in Toronto, Canada, as one of the first Caribbean families that are there. A lot is happening. The Adventist work is growing. And it was right about there, like I said earlier, crusade happened and I felt impressed to get baptized. I already was in love with the Lord because I knew what he did for me. He was not unfamiliar. The kind of praying I had to do, the loneliness that I felt as a boy, I think I felt God more real than your normal child does. And when I talk to other children or other individuals who've had extreme trauma or disability, you either get closer to God or you go the other way. So in my case, God was not a fairy tale. It was not an Adventist doctrine. He was a very real person at an early age. So when I was a part of that in the church and there's a evangelistic meeting, I was impressed to commit my life to the Lord. I felt I'd already given him my heart. And so made a commitment. And so because of that commitment earlier in the year, then I was one of the group that got baptized December, just about now, so many years ago. Was very involved in church. And I think that helped me every now and then. They give me an opportunity as a boy who couldn't speak to read the scripture through somebody else. So they'd have someone stand with me, but to give me the opportunity to be up front and to learn that skill in terms of being in front of people and participating in Sabbath school or worship service or 13 Sabbath. Could you imagine knowing your memory verses, but you couldn't pronounce it? So I would have it there. And then one of my other friends or Sabbath school classmates, they would read it for me. And so we got creative to that. then I started writing out memory verses in ways that we probably would translate it in our day. I started personalizing them and so forth. So I would give notes of the memory verse right out of Bible promise to a member in church, somebody that could have been blind or somebody that was sick. And so I started writing letters and sending them out to individuals, especially in our church that we knew or neighbors or so, because I was very comfortable writing. I was very comfortable expressing that. And so that went a long way to make me feel involved. Fast forwarding a few years later, then I started at our academy in Canada, which was called Kingsway College, but it's academy, even though it's called college. And while I was there, during a week of prayer, that they had special prayer, and I went up before they even called for the prayer, knelt at the altar, and it felt like that was the moment that God just kind of released my vocal cords. They never knew what it was, but I remember at that time feeling a release in my vocal cords. It was relaxed enough to make verbal sounds. And at that altar, I prayed, and in the next few days, I was able to reach out to family and say, I think I can say more. My dad had a good friend that was practicing right down the road from our academy. And so he took me in and gave me speech therapy to help. And indeed, I could say things. But remember now, having so many years not literally pronouncing a word, it goes rusty. Or so I had now, as an 11, 12-year-old, now had to learn how to speak at that age, which is absolutely embarrassing. So when I did so, the struggle was now I could say words, but it was horrible saying it. It was now an opportunity to be laughed at, to be made fun of, whether it's in the classroom or among friends. And so now I could, but I felt I shouldn't, because the pain of embarrassment was worse than not saying anything. So I went through that struggle. Speech therapy helped, and I slowly built up my vocabulary, being able to say things. And then being in academy, again, I had some good teachers and principal that knew my situation. My parents had communicated that to them well. I was kind of like a special project they took on. And right about then, good friends and good support, I started to be able to talk with people individually and say more. And then from academy to be able to, again, read a scripture, do a prayer, haphazardly, but at least it was an attempt. I was still rejoicing, being able to hear the sound, the words come through my lips. And so that was a process. By the time I had near finishing academy, went through that. Actually, I didn't finish up at that academy. My two older brothers were just starting school in another location, Andrews University, Oakwood. And so something had to give. So I went and finished up at high school. It turned out that public high school was a great place of support, another area in which I excelled in art. And so that built up my confidence. My art teachers communicated with me. I practiced talking with them. I could express what I couldn't say in sketch, in paint, in artwork. And so God blessed me with those gifts to get a better listening ear. And I was able to design school flags for 5 different schools, grade school, high schools in the region. My artwork was all over, so people wanted to talk to me. So they were willing to listen to a boy that couldn't talk properly. But my artwork so preceded me, it gave me clout, courage, and more confidence. And as we built up that confidence, I'm in a small community church. My dad is pastoring and leading out in a district of 3. It's up in the midst. We're the only family of color in that region. This is north of Toronto, north in Canada. It's called the Muskoka region. And we're there, but great community support, great acceptance. I started selling artwork so that by the time I went to college, I had enough saved up that I didn't need to take out a student loan. So God used my disability to create some other blessings and gifts that nobody would have expected. The high school I attended and graduated from, before I went to Andrews University, I designed the school flag. They accepted it. They accepted 3 versions of it. And they asked me to do a presentation of what gave me the ideas for it. So now that was a challenge, but it also gave me opportunity to learn to speak publicly. And so those are incremental steps I took that God led. He put the right people in places. My art teacher loved me, so he actually gave me a full scholarship to Europe. So when I graduated high school, I had a full scholarship to Europe. And now the dilemma, do I take that? And now I'm feeling a calling on my life to go into ministry, which I didn't want to because I knew too much who needed to be in ministry. I couldn't speak well. I was shy among people. I didn't think I was great with people. And I saw my dad do it well. You don't want to follow, Kobe Bryant. You don't want to follow, LeBron James or Michael Jordan. You let them play what that's not my lane. So I said, God, you're calling the wrong person. But everything worked out in place. People were praying and God impressed on me. He said, I want you in ministry. You don't think you're able, but trust me. And I said, okay, God, this joke is on you. So I went to college, enrolled as a theology major, hoping that everybody would see this is a stupid idea and that God himself would wake up and come to his senses. And as I started that process, remember now, all along, I'm still learning to speak. You're in high school, you're in college, I'm still stuttering. I'm able to speak, but I'm still stuttering. I still can't pronounce some words. It sounds horrible. And in addition to that, I'm still a shy person by nature. But God took me through each step of that. I get to college, I meet some great professors and some individuals from there. At that time, a lot of students from Canada were attending Oakwood College or the university in Canada. I don't know why I forgot that name right off, or Andrews University, which I attended. And so I felt good support, good friends there. And it was the perfect place for me to feel safe. And then my two brothers were there. They had gone ahead. And so in a good sense, everybody was looking out for me, the baby brother. And that gave me the good environment to continue to grow my confidence and develop. In theology, my Greek teacher loved me, and she said, you love this language, Greek, you're doing well. All my professors said, you're in the right place. And I'm hoping everybody would realize ministry is not for me, it's for my dad, but they're not buying it. They say, you're in the right place. And so all of that, in fact, a lot was being taught when you work on your BA in theology. I'd already got, because I'd followed my dad as a boy. I knew what real ministry was. I knew what serving people was. I knew what church work was. I knew the difficulty of dealing with the plethora of opinions and ways to approach things of a church family. I knew what happened when you deal with I knew the arrows, and I knew the bombs that were thrown at pastors. I knew it. So in that way, I wasn't a surprise. I just knew that wasn't for me. But it turned out there was more in my cup than I realized, because as it was stirred up, realized that all those gifts you need for ministry, I got over my shyness. I gained my confidence. I got better as a speaker. So in training for ministry, especially as you do at our universities, you go to different churches, you learn to preach, you're preaching class, you do a devotion for the dorm and for the dean and all of that. So I'm getting an opportunity to do all of that. And I didn't realize how better I was getting, that my content was so rich because I'd been processing all of this as a boy. I'd heard my dad and other preachers I love. So I've been hearing and processing that on the radio or through church. And so all of that was rich. And then I was a kid that was in the Bible, because the Bible was my company when nobody would talk to me. So all of that I was at home. It's like you would say Kobe Bryant was born with the ball in his hand, so all of that was there, and it just came out. To my surprise, everybody was confirming, no, you are in the right space. You are indeed called, and not only called, you have been equipped. While some people are just getting equipped, you already have what it takes to do pastoral ministry. What came along slower was still my ability to speak fluently and confidently. But God balanced it, because he gave me so many good things to say. People were willing and patient to listen through the imperfections of speech and the stuttering and all of those things that went with it. And so it grew and it grew, and got to the point that, we had something special. My parents came down, and they were still just amazed the progress that I made. From then, I was being invited back to Canada, to the Caribbean to speak, and I hadn't even finished college. I was doing weeks of prayers, evangelistic meetings, though imperfect. I know literally what it means for God to use an imperfect vessel. And so all of those opportunities grew, that built my confidence, that enabled me to get exposed to what ministry is about. And in the process of that, Andrews was a unique area because Elder Frankie Lazarus and myself were the first students of color that enrolled at Andrews University in theology. So initially, they didn't know what to do with us. But note now, Michigan and Indiana are very still prejudiced areas. So we've been sent to churches to speak, and they're not very receptive to us because they didn't know they were sending colored boys, big black kids. So there were churches I went to that said, no, you can't speak. Pastor didn't tell us you're coming, or we didn't know who you were, and they were trying to skirt saying we won't let the person black. I went to one place, I said, we know. Ellen White spoke from this literal pulpit. Elder and his wife, who I guess were the leaders at one little church in Michigan, said, hey, listen, we're glad that you came, but listen, this literal pulpit Ellen White spoke from, it's a historic landmark. So is this church. We cannot let a boy of color speak from that. So I went through all of that made me patient, resilient, realize that even in the Adventist church world, there is still a lot of prejudice and real dilemmas going on. So it certainly turned into a journey, but it's a journey that each step of the way. So Sister Debbie, by the time I came to Kansas, I went through a whole lot. So people looked at this young man and didn't realize what you've been through. I've been through hell and high water. Elder Frank, I've been with the SEALs and at the Navy. I've been through the war, but people didn't know that. So, hey, how's he dealing with this so calmly? That's because God gave me skills in that process. And that's one of the reasons I've been able to stay in pastoral ministry and love it. Still love it, even with all the headaches, because everything got headaches and problems. But love the dynamics of what a church is and all of that. So God used that to build up that resilience, that love, that capability. And so all of that has just propelled me all along the way. Yeah, I can take a pause if there are any questions now. There's probably we would say a second half to this, which you turn it a little bit. Any thoughts or any questions at this point? Sister Debbie, lead us out if you think so.
I think you could probably go on for about another 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll keep going.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll lead us to just some sweet portions now. We've talked through some of the difficulties. So in the midst of all of this, I told you God sent many special people into my lives. Well, at grade school, in Canada, and Andrews University. And right about that time, my second year of Andrews, I met this sweet little girl from Connecticut. Her name is Lorraine. And she came along and she understood me better than anybody could. Because even though she wasn't a pastor's wife, her dad had been a leader of their church in Connecticut. And so she knew what it was because she lived around the church. She took care of the church with him. And so she felt very akin to me. We understood each other. She understood what we're going through. But also, I think God used her to build up my confidence also. As a shy boy, you can understand that aspect now, not feeling comfortable speaking. So even on another level, never felt comfortable talking with girls or dating or anything like that. So she was very patient and understanding and won my heart. And I'll say it this way, and I think I've shared this with you, Elder Frank. When you're working in the wood shop and you come back and you smell bad, you're sweaty, and there's wood chips all over you, and this girl meets you in front of the wood shop, walks you to the dorm, waits for you to shower and go to supper, you know she's a winner. So I could tell early Lorraine was a keeper. And you know how it goes. As soon as we started to hang together, then others had a problem with that. My Canadian friends that I knew from academy, oh, Leroy's mine, and he is, God, we know him better. Then they started to get upset now because somebody got interested in me. You know how that goes, the real. So I'm just telling you real life, real dynamic stuff here. And in the process that all kind of things happen. I've in the process of learning to speak at Andrews and in churches and so on, I've had people get up and laugh and walk out. So I've dealt with the worst of it that most pastors don't. Many people will just be respectful, but the timing or the place I was, like I said, I had white people at churches say, you're not speaking to this church. You're a Black boy. You're not speaking here. Just go back home. And I would just patiently say, well, God bless you. Have a good service today. Told my friends, get in the car and we'll drive away. And you know what those friends did? And sometimes Lorraine was one of those. We, 3 or 4 others would come to me and, keep me company as we ride out another hour or half an hour to a church within the vicinity of our university. And so sometimes, okay, they didn't let you preach a sermon in the car while we're driving back. Or sometimes we stop at a park and do that. And guess what? They would give me feedback. And then I would say, okay, here's a sermon. You heard it about 20 minutes. What would you change? What would do? So I had friends that were real people, real listeners that would kind of give me pointers. Leroy, tell more of that story, or make it more positive. You're sounding too doctrinal. And so I was one of the few pastors that at that point was just took another approach to the gospel. I was less doctrinal, most relational. So early on, one of my professors in BA would say, hey, Leroy, you tell the story. Most preachers don't tell the story in the Bible. Most of the Bible is stories. Tell the stories. People don't hear that. Adventists don't hear that. Now, some may not like it. So I started telling the story. And even years later, when I did my doctorate in terms of training laity how to speak publicly. So interesting that this boy now who couldn't speak does his doctorate in training lay people and pastors how to speak and a new way of how to do it. I just had a couple of pastors 2 weeks ago to ask me, hey, how did you do that sermon? I said, you got to come with me way back. You got to come through the hell and high water where that was born. That's how I got there. How did you get there with the story? I said, well, it's in the Bible, but most people don't tell you as a preacher how to tell the story. They tell you how to preach doctrines. And so I got on that, and that was a blessing to my ministry. So now I was a young pastor finishing up school who, wherever it was, I was telling the stories of the Bible, and I was celebrating them because I recognized if you tell the story, all the principles and teaching are in the story. If you eat the tangerine, the juice is in it. If you eat the orange, the juice is in it. If you eat the carrot, the nutrients are in it. But, we were throwing all that out and so forth. So those are ways that God give me to get ahead and be more resilient and to do things. And my mother always say, you're not a typical preacher. My brother, Don, who was my best supporter, just a few years after I finished and I started pastoring, he would come and hear me. He said, Leroy, there's only one thing I suggest. He said, you're trying to sound like Dad. You're trying to sound like Ella Cleveland. You're trying to sound like Ella Bradford. Be you. God made you. He didn't make them. Learn from them, but be you. You're demonstrative. You're a visual person. Paint the picture. Most preachers cannot paint a picture. They have to use a hymn or a poet. You can do it. You can see it and you can paint a picture as an artist. So work your magic, which most people are not gifted with. So for every disability God gave me, he gave me many more abilities to overcome them and to even exceed that. And so that's how I got through it. I finished Andrews and started pastoring, and it was years before I really felt in sync that I got my rhythm in preaching. And what came of that is that I got more comfortable talking with people in crisis situations. So I was the pastor that was always in the hospital, that was leading the high school when there was a double suicide. Our church put on the service at the high school. I was communicating with, and didn't realize how confident and fluent I was becoming, because when the situation became a crisis, then there was no stuttering, there was no hesitance, and no, I built up a bank of verbiage that if I can't see the word, most preachers, if they don't have their manuscript, they don't know what to do. I don't preach with a manuscript because it flows out of my heart. I know how to know a message and to share it. I got a couple of notes, I got a couple of points, but most preachers now ask, how do you do that? And I said, come back with me 30 years and we'll try to go to that class together. So God put that in me, and that's how it, so he gave me everything I needed, because he said, I want you in ministry. And then I look back, I say, he gave me everything. He didn't miss a beat. I went to Andrews and I didn't realize all my artwork, I paid for my first year and a half of college just for what I made in selling little artwork. And then I had to do loans and what have you and so forth. But God did that. He put everything in my life I needed, the connection with the right churches. As a junior in college, I was working with a pastor who was disabled. He couldn't get around. So he gave me his church of pastors. So I was pastoring a church. I was junior in high school. And I pretty much showed up on Sabbath, do their prayer meeting. I knew how to, I was comfortable around seniors. And so he gave me full leave to do it. So I was able to start that and to build on all the things that I watched my dad do and was very comfortable doing. And so even now, while many pastors who've been in ministry have a difficult time with families who are in crisis or in death, I'm very comfortable in that zone. So that's why I went on and got my master's in counseling. I've been a certified chaplain. Now I train chaplains, and now I serve in terms of Amita Health in Chicago and helping here in Denver. Helping, one of my roles this week here, after we've trained nurse managers and leaders, this week I spent a lot of time with executives of 4 Adventist hospitals out here, how to be resilient in. So here's a boy who went through trauma, now teaching hospital executives how to handle the pandemic, because every day the hospital leaders have to make critical decisions. So I'm encouraging them, I'm praying with them, I'm giving them creative ideas, I'm thinking out of the box from ways they can see. I'm in their inner circle. Here's a boy who couldn't speak. As I just preached in the message today, God makes surprising selections. Amen. He chooses a David who shouldn't have been chosen. He chooses a King Josiah who is an 8-year-old king. You know, he chooses Rahab, the harlot, to be in the genealogy of Jesus. He chooses the Barry Blacks, raised in the hood, and now he's a chaplain of the U.S. Senate. You know, God makes surprising selections, and we're part of that. And so that's a little bit of my story of how God brought it through. Lorraine and I finished Andrews University. We were scheduled to be hired at the conference in Canada, went for an interview, and the president looked us in the face, said, "What are you doing here? I'm not going to hire you." And I said, "Excuse me, sir, your ministerial secretary and your finance officer have given us letters. I have these letters here. Your conference have paid. You know, you paid for a lot of my college. I'm the first generation that's become a pastor in this conference. And if you don't know, I'm a son of this conference, so they all know it. I know of 10 churches that are looking for young youth pastors. So I'm here saying we're available. My wife is a teacher. She's a musician. We're here." He said, "We don't have nothing for you." God shut that door, and then he opened a gate. And I didn't expect him to open the gate because I wanted to go home to Canada. I didn't think I was the boy that could be fit for pastoring in Chicago, the big bad city. After all, I'm from Canada, the place of peace and calm and quiet and dignity. Chicago, you crazy. And even while we're at Andrews, there was only 2 times Lorraine and I visited Chicago. But God led us there. She was teaching there before I finished my master's. And God led us there. He wanted us there. He opened that gate. We didn't understand it. And I worked with a big crusade of baptizing 120 people in one evangelistic meeting. Then I became the pastor of those 120 people. I was only there for 6 months, and then he gave me my own church. And I'm one of the rare pastors in the denomination that have been in a region for most of, aside from the time, Debbie, I've been in California for about 2 years. I was in Chicago all the time. So there are great benefits when you're not moved around. So even now, everybody in Chicago, I'm their pastor. I'm not their conference president, but I'm their pastor. So I get called for, that's why I missed it, a family that knew us real well. Their pastor got ill. So that's why they called me away last week in Michigan to do that service, because they needed somebody they knew, and the power in that time of crisis of having somebody you're very familiar with to walk with you through that. And so all along our ministry, we've seen that. Lorraine and I got married in 84. moved back to Chicago, started ministry. We went to our first church, and the pastor said, "What you're doing here?" So every time God provided something, Satan put a hiccup. But I was resilient. I didn't fall out. Could you imagine your first day at the church? You go ahead to the pastor. He said, "What are you doing here?" Now, he knew who I was, but the conference didn't tell him they'd arranged for me to be there. Neither did the conference, had they promised to hire me full-time, they weren't even giving me. It took 6 months for them to give me a stipend. So I'm giving you the real deal of it. This is a boy that's been it. If I didn't know God wanted me in this, I would have walked away. I was ready to leave it, to walk away, but it was too strong a calling. I went and I managed the grocery store for 6 months until they put me on. I showed up and I helped with the church, and even though the pastor didn't want me, the members welcomed me and wanted, and he got over it because he felt I was a threat. I don't know why. He's a tall, strapping, dark, handsome man. Here's this toony little boy. Why are you threatened by me? But sometimes that's how it goes. Sometimes even among ministry, you have it. I mean, when I left California and came back to Chicago, then it's like, how come you select Coleman to pastor the Shiloh Church? When I came to California to pastor Kansas Avenue, it's like, well, who is he? Why didn't you select one of us? We don't know who he is. So no matter what you turn, God blesses, but Satan always has dilemmas. And through Satan's dilemmas, because I was so tight with God, it didn't really faze me. So when stuff happens in the conference in Southeast with Kansas, you didn't know what kind of roots I had. You may have cut down the main branches of the trunk, but my roots were still fresh. After I left Kansas, there are a couple of conference presidents that hired me and said, "Why wouldn't you want to leave ministry?" I said, "You don't understand. Ministry is not about Kansas Avenue or Shiloh Church or this. Ministry is about God. So you can't, no matter how you treat me, you can't root that out of my heart. You can't." And so a lot of people can't understand that. But the reality is that in my journey of ministry, to every dilemma that was very real, God gave me extra blessings. So I leave my first church in Chicago. We're south, and now I have a young church God blessed me with. Just about all the key people of the church are Lorraine and I. We grew up together. I married them. I blessed their babies. Our children are the same age together. So we still bonded to this day. The church my wife said she loves the most, our kids love the most, is that little church. The only church my parents ask about that our pastors is that first little church. Because there was such a special bond. In fact, there's a lady at that church. She would watch our daughter every now and then. She was little, and she was a church secretary, and she just loved the Colemans. And we were so close to her. We took her up to Canada for one Christmas, and she looks like family. So God, even though we worked in Canada, we had no family within 500 miles. None of us. So our kids were raised without their cousins or grandparents near. But guess what? God gave us spiritual families to come along and be spiritual aunts and uncles and grandparents, and blessed us that way. And to this day, I mean, I can't go on about the just the multiplicity of blessings that God has given to us. As I mentioned, through where He's brought me, He has given me positions in the city of Chicago, where I was meeting with the mayor's council daily. We went in Chicago, we started a prayer walk, and now all the police precincts in Chicago have encouraged their clergy to do the model that we have of the church communities praying for blocks. And we started that at Shiloh Adventist Church after I left Kansas. And so I got a lot of notoriety in Chicago as a pastor. I had members that were complaining that I was spending too much time serving the community, because Catholic priests and Jehovah's Witness and people would come to church. Not that they were trying to find anything wrong. They just wanted to hang around me at church. But many times Adventists were getting upset because we had such a wide range of community individuals. Just a few years ago, and they decided to transfer me to another church from the Shiloh Church. The community couldn't understand it. So 50 community leaders, I mean, commanders in chief of the police, aldermen, all kinds of very important people that wield a lot of clout in the Chicago community. 50 of them showed up to the conference office and say, "What are you doing? Do you not know how God is using this man to team up with us?" And so we just saw a lot of affirmation and confirmation in our ministry over the years. the list goes on that I can now talk about, the list of blessings that have come from the deep, difficult work of learning to speak, drawing close to God, being patient, trusting his call to ministry, doing the hard work of even being embarrassed continually as I slowly learned. God is paying that off, and he has just blessed us in so many ways because he knows we've endured the hard season of pain and suffering. So that's some of my story. Open to questions or wherever you lead, Sister Debbie.
I appreciate that, Dr. Coleman. Such an inspiration to know that the devil could not silence you, and I can barely silence you now. You got so much to say. It is a testimony of who God has been in your life. Tell me what the encounter was between your mom and the doctor when they concluded and decided that they would communicate to your mom the analogy or the association of mental illness with not speaking.
My mom had gone through that a few times, and my dad was there, but my mom was the rock that stood up and spoke. My dad probably was the more respectful, listened to ask some questions, but after he asked enough questions and the doctor persisted with that, my mom said, "Number one, doctor, you've really not evaluated my son properly. And I know you have limitations here," but she really asked him directly. She said, "Are you a believer in God?" And he said, "No." I said, "Okay, that explains it. Well, we will go to God for the medical care that we have now, and God will take care of it." And that's how she approached it, firmly, but respectfully, and said, "Thank you, but we have another doctor, and I think he knows how to handle this." And so my mom led in prayer and prayed every day and so forth, and had tears and laughter at times when I jumped up on the floor trying to, as a kid, tell my parents what I experienced that day, or something that happened in the ball field, or a difficulty or a disagreement with my siblings or so, and couldn't get it out, and the frustration there. So she shed a lot of tears and wore out the floor on her knees, and God answered her prayers. And her mother, who lived with us while we were in Cayman and for much of my younger life, was the other prayer partner with that. So my dad, my mom, and my grandmother specifically were the key ones that prayed. So they lifted me up in prayer, and they got so used to that even when I was, quote, better and on my feet and was growing in ministry, they never stopped. So I still believe all of that, all of where I am today is God answering their prayers, certainly for my benefit and blessing.
So you began speaking and stopped speaking around what age?
Started speaking, they said about the normal age, saying your word, dada, mama, and was doing fine. And then one day, couldn't get anything out. No words were coming out. Every now and then they made a stutter or a fear word. And so then it deteriorated real fast. So that change happened over about a month, they say. It just switched, and they couldn't figure out why. So they were trying different things.
Were you a toddler at that? Okay.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you started speaking where you were able to engage and converse. When do you believe you finally begin to start conversing comfortably? How old were you then? Were you in college or were you in academy? How old?
When I started, I would say comfortably that I felt, we're turning the side of that. I was just finishing high school, just before I left for college, but still far from where I knew was normal and where I wanted to be. And then, go ahead.
What do you believe is the reason why you could not speak any further?
What we believe now, and mainly I think of when I said that I went to that altar and I feel a release in my throat. We believe now, and now doing some research and so on, there are certain things in which the vocal cords just tighten up and will not let anything go through. And there are different terms that they may use from it. It's rare, but that's kind of what we believed it was. Something of that could not have been diagnosed at that time, at that age, and where we were. And so it was something physical. It wasn't emotional, because I had pretty healthy, normal family life. That is what brought trauma to me that I couldn't speak. I had so much to say, communicate. I didn't, and then all the emotions that went with that. But looking back years later, that's the closest that we could come, and it seems pretty accurate. I stay pretty close to my speech therapist, and he shared with me other patients that have come through and other individuals. And so it's made me more sensitive to people who had any disability, but certainly speaking. If I go somewhere and I hear someone who's stuttering, and so I'm drawn to them and try to encourage them and to uplift them and be patient with them, because it's hard to listen to somebody who really stutters or stammers bad or can't speak at all, how to communicate with them. So I have a soft heart to that, and certainly can feel their pain.
Have you ever encountered anyone like yourself who's had a similar journey?
Not quite. Most people I've encountered have more of a stuttering dilemma that they can't get the word out. Mine was very different from that. I didn't have much of that. And I have other cousins. I have cousins who stutter. So there's some stuttering. I have cousins in England I've not met. There's some stuttering there. And I've got cousin who is, she's been in California area for a while. She's a nurse, and she's stuttered all her life, but it's a very different kind of thing. And then, of course, I've come across individuals who just couldn't speak, and individuals who had other kinds of speaking things. Some people can speak, but they're just emotionally so distraught. They're so scared. So I can understand it. Then I try to come alongside, if I'm in a position to do that, to help them and to give them perspectives to consider where it can minimize their anxiety and help them to feel more prepared and to be able to communicate and speak fluently.
Surely. It would appear as though there are those that we can think of in the Bible who had impediments.
Yeah.
And in their minds, they thought would keep them from fulfilling the purpose that God had for them in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever likened yourself or compared yourself to any of them? The first one that comes to mind is Moses for me, but he felt that he could not speak. Have you ever had that struggle in your personal conversations with God?
Yes, I think in Moses, I felt it. I think Moses was very different. I think I personally think his was more of an excuse than a real impediment. I think also Moses felt knowing, being grown up in Pharaoh's house, probably knowing the level of it is, and probably just feeling, wow, I really don't want to go back to where they're watching for me. They probably think I'm dead, but I probably think it's a lot of that. At the same time, I think Moses probably also felt he is not the gifted speaker. Mm-hmm. And then God said, okay, I'll send Aaron to help you communicate. And once that happened, then we didn't hear anything about it. But think of how much, especially in an authoritative vein, Moses had to speak for God. And it didn't come up again in my research of the Bible. It was done. Once he got them out, he was that leader. And then, you look at it, they're in the wilderness and people are coming up nonstop. Before Jethro said, hey, you need a team to do that. Moses is talking with people, counseling with them, solving problems. He's a leader of this nation, estimated 1 to 2 million people, and so he could speak. He probably just didn't feel comfortable with it, didn't feel like he was the one, like I felt, to do that. God, you've got other gifted people. Why are you choosing me? So I was there a lot. Well, you got to fix me to get ready. Just leave me alone with my art and my easel. And, I could just talk to my family and friends, but don't put me in front of a crowd of people to represent you and your gospel that needs to be accurately communicated. So what a joke. You're using a boy who barely can speak, who's by nature the shyest boy on the planet. And you want to now go through all that trouble to prepare him to communicate that. And that's not what he would choose. Why are you doing all that? Again, God comes back. God will take the toughest route. He'll use the most unexpected person, and that's what he does. And I had to grow to accept and learn that. And that's one of the things that I've come to be excited about God for, because the people we would never expect to choose for those positions, those opportunities to represent God in that capacity, including Moses, God chose him to do that.
As you're speaking, I can't help but think of the phrase, I hope I say it correctly, God doesn't call the qualified.
Yes.
He qualifies the call.
Yes, that's it.
And it seems as though, I don't know, that you're drawn to your drawing, your ability to paint and so forth. What is the last thing that you did in terms of that? Just let you go slip away quietly and do that. What is the last thing that you actually had a chance to pour yourself into on canvas?
Yeah, wow. Well, first of all, I gotta honestly say, and Elder Frank, my buddy, knows this because he does some art. I think one of my big regrets is that when I said, let me hear God and go into ministry, my culture and my thinking made me feel that I had to, it was either or. It's only now that I look back and said, I could have incorporated art more. My good friend, Nathan Green, who we know is the Adventist and the worldwide artist, was my roommate in college. I'm the one that encouraged Nathan to sign his name on his little sketches and take them to the bookstore, and they sold in 2 weeks. And then he did it again and again and again. Sat with his parents and just say, Nathan, go for it. You're gifted. You're gifted in many things. That family was gifted in everything. So that kind of reminded me. So while I was in college, I sketched and did more with him because you got to partner with that. But when it came to ministry, it's almost, it came to me like almost, I don't have time for that. Ministry absorbed me, and which is very typical to pastors. You do it. And again, like an artist, you know, when I worked in high school, when I worked at projects and things, it would consume me. I mean, you just don't spread it out 2 weeks. You did it till it was done. You skip meals, nobody could find you. And so that was my dilemma. If I went back to art, nobody would find me pastoring. They couldn't reach me in my assignment. So I made a choice, either or. And it's only much later that my wife and kids said, you know what, we'd have loved to see you do it more. Now, I did a little bit. I did little sketches. The last thing I did was of my uncle that died in February. My cousin Arlene sent me a picture of he and my mom, and I just did a sketch to make it personalized, because it's a beautiful picture that my sketch couldn't compare to, but it's the personal touch that I did the sketch of them. I did it in charcoal, and the contrast of charcoal, black and white, made it very different. And that's the last thing. And I took it because Lorraine and I were the only family out of town that went in February to his funeral service in Brooklyn. And so that was the last thing that I did. And it's still a struggle for me to do it. I think I'm now more, I've got some things in plan. I'm working on some things. I'm working on a sketch series with my family. I've got the idea of the sketch, but I can't show anyone till it's done. I've done a few, when I was in college, I did a few sketches of some of my friends and so on. But after that, there's a big drought of that. I did things like do a drawing for Sabbath school, you know, the Sabbath school theme. I do that for the Sabbath school superintendents and so forth. But if I look back, my mind and my ministry understanding could have even partnered with people like Nathan to say, here's the idea. You do this, I do this. So when I went in my first trip to the Holy Land, I said, this is ridiculous. Every pastor should get here, because once you're there and you feel it, it takes you to a whole different level. And since I'm a storyteller, pastor, preacher, you know, then I can really tell it, because my feet were on the Sea of Galilee. I swam in the Tiberias River, you know, all of that. I think it's invaluable. So sometimes I think, especially in ministry and other fields, I think when God give us a high calling or service, sometimes we divorce, so to speak, using that term, ourselves from some of the other gifts. And so now I'm collaborating with some musicians and some artists to do something in terms of the Great Controversy, where we can show videos and have different Adventist artists. So we're working on that collaboration right now. So that's the latest thing that's in the thing. But I wish I had done more. I've done sketches of my kids and families and so forth. Yeah.
Very good. Knowing that you were with Nathan Green. I don't know if everybody on knows who Nathan Green is, but a lot of
Tell
his
him.
work shows up in hospitals, the Adventist hospitals, the big portraits, the artwork that you see in their lobbies and in their hallways.
Yes.
As most of the time he is the artist who did those renderings. I know some have asked when my uncle passed earlier this year in September, the picture that appeared on the postcard of Elder Bradford was done by Nathan Green.
Yeah.
And of course, there's some of the work that he's done for Sabbath school lessons and any number of things. And
That's
so
right.
a wonderful talent, wonderful talent. Before we open it up for questions, you have a wonderful, wonderful story as a chaplain. You have a myriad of them, but there's one in particular that touches a heartstring in an unbelievable way. The chaplain or the pastor who's called to the hospital at 3-something in the morning. And he tells the patient, I happen to be in the area. And the young man's reply, the man's reply is, no, you weren't. You knew I was dying, and so you came by. And he's a bitter, angry individual. You know what story I'm speaking of?
Oh, wow. It's kind of coming back to mind.
Okay, so let me give some more. He is bitter, he's angry, and he's not talking. And the pastor / chaplain just sits there with him and he says, is there anything that, okay, so now you continue. So I'm not telling your story. I just think it's a wonderful story.
Yeah. Sister Debbie, you're so right. I mean, there's just so many amazing stories. Again, God has given me the opportunity to pastor churches, but also to work in the hospital directly with patients and with ICU nurses, ED, all of that crazy stuff. And apparently I'm an adrenaline junkie, but God made me to operate in the crisis. And that's just how I'm wired. And in my training as a chaplain and so forth, all my supervisors came up with that and said, listen, it's rare and it's few to find that. So there's a situation where, I went in and gentleman was there and he said, no, I need to talk with you. And he certainly slowly opened up because earlier he wasn't willing to. And I went in because I visited that hospital many, and something just said, hey, go and check on, see other staff, see if there's any patient needs there. Because you got hospitals which are full ED or ICU, there's always somebody that can need support 24/7. But in that situation, usually the chaplain was on call when there was a trauma or a crisis or a code, a cardiac arrest. I went by and chatted, and nurses pointed out, and I went in and sat down and just said, hey, how you doing? And what have you? And he had many issues. He had schizophrenia, he had drug addiction, he had that. But at that moment, he was stable, and he said, listen, I'm trying to reach out to God. And he said, could you tell me what one of your favorite stories in the Bible is? I just want to hear it. And I said, well, are you a little bit acquainted with spirituality, the Bible? He said, yeah, a little bit. But I'm just moved to just ask you that. And so I looked at him and I thought, and so I shared with him the story of the Prodigal Son. And again, remember, I'm a storyteller. So I tell that to him in a very personal way with creative liberty. Not as if I was a preacher reading it, but just told him man to man. And he set up, his eyes open, and he just started moving closer. And I've never heard in all my preaching years and all my times talking to people, somebody who just so like a switch went on, his heart opened, his body opened, and he was just receiving it, almost like he was under a waterfall or drinking lemonade. He just took it all in. As I'm telling this story and putting it in his language, he is just, good Lord. And then by the end of that, I didn't realize 5 or 6 nursing staff were now behind us by the door listening to that. and they had to kind of keep down their reactions, not to disturb it or distract him. And after I was finished with that, he said, tell me again. So I told him again. I told him the story again. And then he started asking question dialogue. He said, I'm that son, aren't I? I'm that one. And he said, I've never thought of that no matter what I did, what's wrong in my life, God would give up anything for me. Like that father in the story of the prodigal son. The father kept going and looking every day, looking for his son. He didn't have to. So by the time the son turned around to come home, the son didn't have far to go. The father was there. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made it home. The Jewish tradition said that he. There we go. We're still connected? Okay, I hit something wrong there. And so the Jewish tradition tells us if the father hadn't come to meet the son, the community probably wouldn't have made him home, allow him to get home. He brought such disgrace to the family and the community. So I stole that story. This gentleman just embraced. He said, that son is me. I said, yes, it's you. And he said, and my father has been waiting for me all these years. He said, how do I run into his arms? So I said, he's right here. He's right here. I said, feel his embrace, hear his welcome, and he's going to find ways to celebrate your homecoming. That father told the others to kill the fatted calf and put together a party and celebrate it. And I said, now the other part of the story, some people are not going to be excited for you to come home because they've gotten addicted to you being in trouble. They've gotten addicted to you not being on the good side of God. So some people are not going to take good to it, like the son who was home. Why are we celebrating? So he just embraced it and prayed together. He gave his life to God there. I followed up with him because on the chaplain role, typically the medical staff can't do that, but the chaplain, you can follow up with him. I got his number, gave him mine, followed up with him. He joined the church, not in an Adventist setting, but he joined a good Christian church. On his way, doing well. His children, his family is so proud of him. And unexpected, but God certainly orchestrated it.
Amen. I appreciate that, but that's not the one I was talking about. The one I'm speaking about is a gentleman who shows up at the hospital. It's late, 3 o'clock in the morning or so, and this individual is very bitter. And the chaplain or pastor asked, could be you, ask, is there anything you want to talk about? Nothing's giving. He's not budging. And then I guess some time passes and he said, well, there is one thing I want to ask you about. He said, I've been trying to find someone. He said, years ago, I became drunk with some friends and I agreed to take responsibility for pulling down the brake for the train? And do you know what story I'm talking about now?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the one I'm talking about.
So I certainly remember that, but there's some details on that. It's not coming to my mind, but all that went with that.
To pull the lever in time, and as a result, the family died because he didn't do what he should have done in a timely manner, and he spirals into depression, and he spends his life carelessly
trying to live through that. Yeah.
There you go, because he has not processed this incident that has occurred, and it has haunted him and haunted him. And he said, I wish that I could have found them so that I could explain, because I understand the only one that made it was the child. The parents died, and I need to tell them that it was me because I was so careless. And if God would just answer my prayer and let that occur, then I could be at peace, at least with that, before I died. And the gentleman that's sitting there begins to weep, and he says, well, I want you to know something. God has answered your prayer because I'm the son of the parents that were killed in that accident. And he received that peace that he had been searching for all that time. That was the story that you shared with me. And it was so moving to know, even when we think we're at our wits' ends and have come to the end of our journey here on this life, even down to the nth degree, God is still pursuing. He's still relentlessly looking after the needs of his children. And he sent someone even in that moment to offer peace.
So even in that moment.
I want to thank you just for sharing that, and as well as for all of those who offer the services that they do by way of chaplaincy and encouraging words. Tough job, and your compassion how you speak through it and share the depths of your soul for those individuals, I know is dearly appreciated. Well, individuals who are still here, thank you so much for hanging with us and sharing in this time of fellowship with Dr. Coleman. Some of you may have questions and or remarks. I know I saw some comments, believing in yourself and trusting God, that came from Professor Main. And certainly we have witnessed that this afternoon. But is there anyone else? Thank you for that, Michael. Any other comments or questions from those who have been listening? You can unmute anyone at all.
I'd like to find out what concentration his art is in. Is it people based? Is it home? What was your focus in your art? Because that was a way of expressing yourself and really getting out what you could not say verbally on paper. So I just wondered what was it that was the focus that you brought out? Nature, people. You know, I draw too, but I draw more romantic things of people, and that was my focus when I was coming. I stopped drawing once I got married, truth be told, sad to say.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, kind of like you, my art was focused on people. I would sketch portraits. When I was in high school and working my way through, I sketched portraits of coworkers and people at church and so forth, and do a sketch in a way. Many times it would be pencil, or it may be charcoal, or it may be watercolor, which is pretty difficult. That's not my specialty. But I do people and do a lot of nature. I would do trees. I would do flowers. I would sometimes just do smiles and have people guess whose smile is that, what have you. So that's what I focused on. And so even now, that's where I'm most comfortable. Since I haven't done a lot lately, then your fine-tuning skills kind of get rusty. But those have always been my interest. Love trees, love flowers, love nature. What was it? There was one of our chaplains whose mother died. She was a flower lover. So I just sat there in a few minutes, just did a sketch outline of it, then colored it up and shared it in. And then the team put their name on it and gave it to hers, and she just loved it, had it framed. It's just a little piece. But yeah, I typically love those venues, those aspects. There are others that are just so gifted in other things. But
well, how did you earn money? You said you used that to finance your way through college at the beginning.
Yes. When I was in high school, I did a few buildings. I have a few. Elder Frank, there are two of my pieces from Canada that's in Trinidad. I don't know where they are. We did it for school. They were selected, and they went to a city hall or some municipal location in Trinidad, the exchange that we had as artists and countries and so forth. I did a lot of creative work. I did sketches of children playing and so on. Those would sell a lot. So many times those things were on Sabbath. So my art teacher so believed in me, he respected my Sabbath. He would take them to the shows, and he knew what range to do them in better than I. And he would say, "Hey, Coleman, you got a few checks back here, $500, $150, what have you." And so I did a lot of those. So whether it's a sketch of a brook of water or a sunset or what have you, I did a lot of those, and I didn't think those were that good. But sometimes it's not the skill of it; it's the theme that moves the people. And like Nathan Green, he's an artist that's so meticulous. His detail is ridiculous. One of the ones that I have that he actually did for me, it's real. It's a doctor, and there's a big one of it now, but this is the early version that he did out as a trial. Doctor's in his study, and he is looking through his books to try to figure out what best way to approach the care for a patient. And he's looking up research, and he's got his books open, and you can see the words written on the books. You can see the title of the books behind him. And this is in not a large painting. His detail is just so incredible. And so he's gifted at that, as he does a lot of people, loves a lot of nature himself. So he's really kind of inspired me also. But many times I would do general things, an unsuspecting thing, a leaf just floating in a pond and not even finishing the thing. But those are surprising things that sold, at the art galleries that we were a part of during that time.
All righty. Thanks.
Hope that answers that question. Thanks for the interest there, my fellow artist.
Thanks, Michael. Any other questions or remarks?
I just wanted to know if you have anything that you can show us now.
Not with me right now, unfortunately. I don't have anything right with me in showing distance. I'm not at home. I'm here in Denver and go back to Chicago. Yeah, so I'm so to speak on the road. And so I'm not at where I have some things, but opportunity gets a chance, I could maybe send a few things that maybe through this connection or through this form, Sister Debbie can pass on to you.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of things I've done for people, I've not kept. I've risked it, done it, never done it again, never saw it after it was done. I gave to people. A gentleman came that worked with me in a mental facility when I was just finishing high school. And I did one of each of his grandkids, and he loved it and gave me good money for it. He said, no, I can't just give you a couple of bucks for this. He said, you're going. And so, people that funded, and those are some of the things that went into my college fund. And he was just so excited about, but I never saw them again. So I did things for people in occasions as opposed to collecting them, posting them on the wall. A lot of that happened. And sad, because you're part of a ministry family and all of that. In addition to losing furniture and stuff, I've lost many, many original things. I still remember them. So some of them I've gone back and I've done and so forth. And so, yeah, the regrets of not having a lot of that still with me. I feel that. But thanks for checking.
You have a question that came in. What type of urban ministry are you implementing in Chicago?
What type of urban ministry in Chicago? Wow. The urban ministry we've implemented, how can I describe it? It's really a model that really teaches churches to roll up their sleeves and get dirty. Don't run from it. Don't just come in and have church. Church is just a huddle. Nobody cares about how you worship beside God, but church is just a huddle to play the game. When I go to see a football game or a hockey game or a basketball game, I don't care about the sidelines. I don't care about when it's called. I want to see the game. And likewise, we encourage churches to make a difference. And even now during pandemic, it's even more of an opportunity. People are going to be open to church support. What we've done in Chicago, like I've said, we started praying for block by block, and we've had over 90 communities, 90 churches in Chicago that are now praying for the communities. So if you imagine 90 different churches, not every place in Chicago, but within the sphere, it's caught on. We've partnered with police departments in a time where police working with police officer was very difficult with what would happen. Our church went in and supported our police officer. We didn't believe that everything they did was fine, but we gave them support. Myself and a team of 15 other pastors in our area in Chicago, we had pagers. If a young person was shot or something happened, we were paged, and the police partnered with us that we would show up to pray there. And within a few hours or sometime later than that, an entire community of 150, 200 people, they would shut down that block, and we would have a prayer vigil. And then in addition to that, we would start to strategize what needs to be changed. So it was very proactive. We had for every program we got started named after a young boy, 9-year-old, that was just taken down in his backyard, Taliban style. His parents moved into a community. His dad had some connections in the past, and somebody was offered him, so they shot up the young man. And out of that, another parent who lost two boys, she came to us, said, what can we do? So we partnered with an artist, we partnered with funeral homes. And so we put together for any parent who lost a child, a young person, 15 years and younger, they would have psychological support. Their funeral expenses were taken care of. They would have additional protection for a while. We partnered with all kinds of things, and that's over a large region in the south portion of Chicago. We were doing so much that I literally tell you, my members were getting upset. Could you imagine members going to the conference and saying, your pastor is doing too much in the community? Imagine that, which is absolutely ridiculous. That's what a church is there for. And yet I had to be patient with that and said, hey, I'm not just doing it. My job as a pastor is to enlist you in ministry. So that's just a little bit of the kind of urban ministry. It's downright dirty. It's ugly. We're in the midst of this. I did funerals where gangs showed up and shot at us while we were loading the casket in the hearse. So that's the kind of ministry. We had at a point that if any young person we were hosting or asked to do the funeral, we would check with the police to see if they're involved in gangs. Because if they're involved in gangs, like happened many places, at the funeral, the gangs will show up. So many times, if that was the case, we had to direct the families, we had to intervene, we had to work with the police department and the community business and residents, and not have it at the church. Many people, I want my son to be married at the, no, he can't. He's a drug dealer. He's the king gang leader in the area. I had an Adventist lady, she was in Atlanta, the grandmother was in Spokane, Washington. They wanted the son, who none of them have talked to in 5 years, a grown man, 23. He was a druggie and the gang leader. He got killed, and they wanted us to host it. The police said, no way. So we facilitate the family. We said, we can have something private at the coroner's office. We can do this, and we worked it out. The mother was fine with it, but the grandmother went insane. So we touched bases with all the things that happened, supporting police, you name it. We were on call. The church was on call when anything, whether it was burglary, we knew about it. We were on a pager, and they trusted our prayers. Then we were involved in the mayor's counseling for how you escalate more police officers, better training, intervened in cases where, because white officers worked in Black neighborhood, and many times they'd show up and our cars were parked at the church, and we had cars towed on Sabbath. And then we had to now go and intervene, and some officers knew us and others just didn't know what was going on and had our cars towed on a Sabbath day. So in the good and the bad, we worked through it. We covered a lot of bases, drugs, what have you. I lived in the parsonage, so right around the church, you would hear shots all the time. And now imagine what that meant for my family when they knew I had to go to the hospital or to go see a family in distress or whatever that is in the middle of the night. I've got to drive through that. So that's that's what we were involved in, all of it.
Thank you for elaborating on that question. There's another question that has come forward through the chat, and I want to link it with something you said earlier. You mentioned that you were told when you arrived at a church where Ellen G. White once had spoke. You mentioned that they told you that they did not want you to speak and you were not allowed to speak from that pulpit. Have you returned to that church, and have you?
I did. They invited me back a year later. A year later, they changed pastors, and he heard what happened, invited me back. We had a wonderful time. And for the first time, they heard a person of color speak to them with eloquence and with absolute delivery, and to challenge them and to acknowledge the history and the utter respect of that pulpit that Ellen White spoke from. So I had a chance to speak from that. And in that area of Michigan, there were many churches like that a pulpit or place that Ellen White or James White worshiped, or early pioneers. So in that area, I had a chance to step into the places of position of preaching the gospel, working with churches in those areas. And so, yeah, thanks for asking. But yeah, I did go back. I did eventually speak from there, and just counted a joy and just brushed it off. We went in the car and prayed for them and left, and that's where they are. And again, many, even to this day, there are many Adventist churches and Christian churches that will not entertain a person of color in their pulpit. So it's still the reality. Remember now, during slavery stuck around that long because there was a deep religious component. They actually believed people of color. It was a deep spiritual belief. They believed we were not to be in the same room or place with them or worship with them or all those other things, or believed us to be slaves. So it was deep within that culture, and it still persists. It's still very deep in places in the South. And that's why again, a few years ago when our country was led by, I guess, one of the most notorious presidents, that so much stirred up that the white religious right came back to it. And that's what propagated in the last few years. so much police attack on people of color and so much inequity and injustice. So yeah, but
Unfortunately,
it was
that's,
healing for them. It was healing for them and for me to go back.
I was going to say, unfortunately, that has spilled over into areas within the Christian community. And we're speaking about the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yeah.
And for some, it still lingers in a number of areas as it pertains to minorities. And I think Dr. Rock has departed. I know he usually does between 4 and 4:30 because of a commitment, but a group of them have come together, and we're going to hear about it in the next couple of weeks from Dr. Rock regarding a series that they have put together having to do with social justice.
Yeah.
And it is an exciting project that is in its completion right now. And we'll look forward to hearing sharing some highlights and sharing with everyone how to get it. But it is the first time in the history of this church that this type of project is going to be done. But let's go a step further, Dr. Coleman.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we'll hear from him in reference to that. What are your thoughts about cultural bias in terms of Christian art and the depiction of Jesus and angels as though they are Caucasian? And how does that line up, or how have you observed that is relatable or not relatable as it pertains to those who are not Caucasian, minorities, Spanish, African American, Caribbean? Have you noticed that there are any observations along those lines?
Yeah. Since I've been in contact with many artists over the years, and myself seeing that, I mean, it stands out to us as artists of color. But it apparently not an excuse for it. It's so steeped into our American and Christian culture worldwide. It goes back even before America, that when African kings and artists went to Europe and they did such amazing things, the Europeans actually took their stuff like they would take music of our great musicians, Black musicians, and steal it and take the credit. Many of Elvis's songs were stolen from Sunday churches. And our people had no means of doing copyright or doing that. And it boomed because nobody of Caucasian color was doing that kind of music. Likewise with art. Overall in the world of art, a lot of great things that have been done. It's just today there's a little bit of movement toward it. But in terms of Christian art, and specifically Christ or God being depicted as white, it's so ingrained in it. And even people of color have come to accept it. And I'll give you an example. I went to the Turks and Caicos Island to do a full month of crusade and revivals, all of those islands, Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, and so forth. And at that time, one of the Steps to Christ came out with a depiction, a colored African with beautiful African colors, a depiction of Jesus that's mixed. And in the Caribbean, they didn't want it. Nobody would take it because they're so used to Jesus particular. They thought it was an abomination. So we just had to pull back and listen and hear. So it's so perversive that even people of color, especially Caribbeans who are very steeped in the British background, it's so much a part of it. We think it's normal and should be. Nobody questioned that. Again, people believe Jesus was white until you come along and realize all Jesus is mixed, and the people and so many characters in the Bible. And then I'm not sure how many people want to fight that battle. They may think that battle is not big enough. There are other important things. So I think those are things why it's been slower. And I think the other thing is probably fewer people of color have been identified and supported of Christian artists to be encouraged to do that depiction. The Adventist Church has enlisted many of the key white artists, and that's where they come from, as opposed to now, even our Sabbath School Quarterly. I'm one of those that's convicted. The quarterly should look different in every region. It shouldn't be the same. Sameness is not unity. And so I think the cultural nuances of each area of the world need to show up in things the church does. I don't think the quarterly needs to be coming from the GC the same everywhere in the world. I think it needs to have different things in a world that, again, every business, especially in the medical field, you have to, it's now legal. You have to show that you have a plan for DEI, diversity and equity and inclusion. You've got to do it, but the church is way behind on it. So when you look at our pictures, even in our quarterly, what's sketched and done, and you know that most of believers are believers of color or minority around the world, but you're still just showing people of a Caucasian descent. So the church is so far behind that. I think there's so much to do that it's frustrating for artists, for people who know better. And again, God still works in spite of it to still draw people in spite of our prejudice or lack of inclusion and equity and justice. People still come to Jesus, and in spite of the fact we wrap Christianity in an American culture. Most of how we do Christianity, especially in the Adventist church, is wrapped in Americanism. It's not Christianity. It's wrapped in that, and we put up with it, but it's not good. It's not to the glory of God. But fortunately, God is patient. He works with us. He works slowly through us as he slowly calculated when Jesus would come in and make those changes in society. And it's a work in progress.
Indeed, it is. One of the listeners has indicated in the chat, Dr. Coleman is so articulate. This is a gift from God. And I think I'll close with that, with a final question for you. What would you want this audience to remember about Dr. Coleman? Not just what God did with an ordinary young man who had been deemed signed up for something else. Oh, that perhaps set aside, he's not even talking all these years. And now he's got this wonderful gift of the English language that has taken him into hallways and churches and hospitals and places where perhaps they thought you would never go. What is it about Dr. Coleman that you would want us to remember aside from that?
Wow. Thank you for the question. Yes, with all that's being said, remember that I'm the biggest fan of God. In the words of David, I will bless the Lord at all times. Now that he has allowed my tongue and my voice I lift it up, I send it, and now I have an opportunity to spread it to LGBT community. I have them calling me to counsel, and I'm able to share with them, irrelevant of their lifestyle, what Jesus means to me, and to share it on a personal basis. So I am, you would say, I'm a promoter of the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, that he's the most personal God. He won my heart. Sometimes the hardest heart to win is a church boy who's tired of church and people, and have seen the duplicity and the arrogance and the hypocrisy. In spite of that, it doesn't even bother me because he's won my heart. And that's what I want you to remember. And I look for ways to express that through the art, through words, through song. And that's where I am. Thank you.
I appreciate that. What a powerful message. Dr. Coleman, it's been such a delight to have you spend this time with us and to take time out of your schedule to share about some of the nuggets of your life that perhaps were unknown, especially the part of the artist and your expression through that, and some of your family history, and to remind us of how powerful God is. He took this boy that wasn't talking, and now he has you as a mouthpiece for kingdom building. Ain't God good?
Ain't God good?
I appreciate that so much. And thank you for joining us once again. It has been so nice to have this time of fellowship with you. May the Lord bless and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and grant you and yours peace. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. For more information about this program, This Is My Story, Testimonies That Move the Soul, see us at our website. We look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.